Five, four, three, two, one, zero. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for tuning in to Live with Andy. I'm your host, Andy DeBala. Who else would it be? We do have a interesting show ahead of us today. George Webb will be joining us at 7:30 p.m. to be breaking down some of the recent research that he's been partaking in. He traveled to South Africa to dig into like the origins of the coronavirus and the vaccine bioweapon game. And he's also recently, I was actually on his Twitter Spaces earlier today, and he started digging into this Restrict Act. And right before the show, I started doing a little research myself and into the senator behind the Restrict Act, Mark Warner. And I'm gonna be doing a little breakdown of him and some of his work involving the Restrict Act, which is incorporated in the CHIPS Act, which brought all the chip manufacturing over here to the U.S. from Taiwan, and how a military simulation exercise is behind it all. They had a little backdoor meeting with the senators, and after this backdoor meeting, the CHIPS Act had bipartisan support, and it was because of national security that it had bipartisan support. So I'm going to break down that leading up to George Webb joining the show at 7:30, because the Restrict Act does affect him. It may affect other citizen journalists in the future. If people don't know, here, let me put this on the screen right here. The Restrict Act is being used. How it came up. It is being used to ban TikTok. We've seen this a lot in the news lately. That TikTok is owned by China. So for national security purposes, we don't want China infiltrating our iPhones and collecting metadata on us and all of our population, let alone the politicians using the app. So they developed this Restrict Act to ban TikTok in the United States. And the Senator Mark Warren is the one leading the charge on this Restrict Act and this TikTok ban. Now I'm going to read a little bit of this article, then I'm going to be digging into the other aspects of how this could in the future be linked to banning citizen journalism and banning truth journalism in the United States. We saw that go on during the coronavirus pandemic. George Webb was getting banned on Twitter. Us at Neighborhood News Studio, we couldn't open an account at all. He was getting his Patreons taken down. He can't publish books on Amazon. So he was personally affected by the ban of truth and citizen journalism. And I think they are going to use this Restrict Act first to ban China, and then they're going to start focusing on the truth journalists that are against their agenda. So here we go. Here's a little bit of this article. It's called Rest of the World. Let me turn my brightness up. I can barely see right now. Meet the U.S. Senator leading the effort against TikTok. With the Restrict Act, Senator Warren wants to reset the way the U.S. treats China tech industry. Now, he was a part of that backdoor meeting that led to the CHIPS Act, and he's a full supporter of the CHIPS Act as well, which brought chip manufacturing to the United States. Here we go. Officials in Washington. Let me try to zoom in here. Officials in Washington have been sounding the security alarm about TikTok for years, but now the United States is closer than ever to blocking the social app from operating within its borders. TikTok CEO Chu's appearance before the House Energy and Commerce Committee earlier this month just seemed to make things worse for the company. Many lawmakers said outright that they believe TikTok should be banned. Chu was reluctant to criticize the Chinese government or state outright that they could not access TikTok's data, which only heightened suspicions. Meanwhile, lawmakers in the Senate are crafting a legal process for enacting a ban and setting a framework for future restrictions. That's one of the important parts, setting a framework for future restrictions. I think that's going to branch off into citizen journalists, unfortunately, within the United States, and ban free speech. That's what they're going to try and do, at least. Introduced earlier this month by Senator Mark Warner, a Democrat representing Virginia, the Restrict Act is a blueprint for how the U.S. could take action against foreign tech moving forward. It lays out the new government process for restricting tech products that threaten national security. Restrict doesn't name TikTok specifically, but it's widely understood that the app would probably be the first use of the new process. And that's important because it's like, we're going to use China, or Russia to implement the speech or just content creation, or who owns app and what going forward. They're going to use this Restrict Act. Like, China's the big threat. Russia's the big threat. They're using them as the excuse to ban us little guys, just like they did during the pandemic. I'm going to continue. Introduced earlier this blah, blah, blah. Senator Mark Warner, a Democrat representing Virginia. The Restrict Act is a blueprint for how the U.S. could take action against foreign tech moving forward. It lays out the new government process. I think I just read this. For restricting tech products that threaten national security. Restrict doesn't name TikTok specifically. Blah, blah, blah. First use the new process. The bill targets 6 specific adversary nations: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, and Venezuela. All the BRICS countries forming. But Restrict is also part of a broader shift in U.S. policy away from a single global tech ecosystem and towards a future in which who uses what app is increasingly decided by national borders. That fragmented future poses a challenge for U.S. companies like Apple that rely on Chinese manufacturing. But it's also an ominous sign for tech companies around the world. After decades of advocacy for free trade and an open internet, the U.S. government is getting ready to treat foreign software as a national security threat. I will repeat, the U.S. government is getting ready to treat foreign software as a national security threat. And you saw there that Apple, they rely on China for manufacturing, and before they could they apply this Restrict Act, starting limiting free speech and limiting countries' access to our apps and our population. Before they could apply the Restrict Act, they had to bring the manufacturing of our chips, of our semiconductor chips, from Taiwan over here to the U.S. and because it's a national security border, it has to be handled within our borders. And I'm gonna be digging into that real quick right here. So the Senator Mark Warner, I got another. Here's his Twitter, actually. George should be joining us at 7:30 Eastern, by the way. So just stay tuned. He's going to be digging into this Mark Warner and this Restrict Act and how it affected him personally. That's kind of why I'm setting the stage for the big guy's entrance here. Give me a moment while I take a drink. Got to wet the whistle for you guys. So here's Mark Warner's Twitter, at Mark Warner. A really great video contextualizing why we needed the CHIPS Act and what a tremendous bipartisan accomplishment this was. Proud to have gotten it to the finish line, and now I'm working hard to get it implemented well. So he was behind the CHIPS Act, and he was behind the implementation of the CHIPS Act, bringing semiconductor chip manufacturing to the U.S. Now, this is the I guess getting into the important stuff right here. I guess it's all important. Who's to say that I know what's more important than others? I'm just giving you the information. You guys decide for yourselves. So here's an article how a closed door national security briefing convinced senators to pass the CHIPS bill. Now, this gets into the CHIPS Act, into the CHIPS manufacturing, and it was written on July 25th, 2022. So, you know, our heads of national security, they met with some of these senators, and this CHIPS bill, and this, you know, our political climate nowadays, our senator, our the left and the right, they can't get along with about anything. But this CHIPS Act passed with bipartisan support. So here we go. 1 month ago, sorry, I'm a little rusty, guys. It's been a while. I've been in Arizona. I went on vacation, went to the Grand Canyon, visited a bunch of sites. So I'm a little rusty in the first quarter of the game here with my speech and my connecting of thoughts. Sometimes I got a bunch of notes written down to help me out, which I don't normally read so much. So just forgive me while we warm up here. Here we go into the article. 1 month ago, it seemed unlikely that the Senate would pass its sweeping $280 billion CHIPS Plus package to subsidize U.S.-made semiconductor chips before the August recess. A number of lawmakers in both parties objected to the idea of subsidizing a private industry, and Republicans refused to negotiate after Minority Leader Mitch McConnell threatened to tank the bill unless Democrats agreed to drop their climate-heavy reconciliation package. But on Wednesday, the CHIPS and Science Act cleared the Senate on a 64-33 vote, garnering support from several key Republicans, including McConnell. It then passed the House on Thursday. The bill's ultimate success in the upper chamber came about after a pivotal closed-door national security briefing in mid-July and crucial interventions with Republicans by former top Trump officials, according to sources involved in the process. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, who played a lead role in the Senate passage, tells Time that the briefing was one of the turning points in negotiations, putting pressure on the lawmakers to break the year-long impasse on semiconductor legislation. And one of the things why this bill got passed is important. So just please stay tuned. To convince reluctant senators to spend more money to produce semiconductors domestically, Raimondo marshaled a national security argument about the risk of relying on foreign nations like China for chips. Now, this is where George Webb in the past a week while I've been frolicking around in Arizona in the vortex of Sedona and checking out the Grand Canyon and some of these old adobe huts. While I was doing that, George was digging into simulation exercises, SimEx exercises by the WHO, and how those SimEx exercises were used to push our public policy during the pandemic, which is why you saw like Operation Warp Speed, all the mass stuff, all the lockdowns, all the jabs on all our government officials and the military. It was because of these simulation exercises that gave them the metadata to present to our politicians in a way where we can be like, hey, if this happens, blah 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 blah, our national security is going to be breached and it's going to be the end of the United States. So we need to start implementing some of these rules and regulations. We need to bring chips over to the United States. So this is something this Raimondo took part in herself, was a little military simulation exercise before this Chips Act passed, and it's just like a story that they're going to continue to use time and time again. Is they're just going to use these simulation exercises for metadata to influence our politicians, and that's, I think, what's going on. On July 13th, Democratic Senators Chuck Schumer of New York and Maria Cantwell of Washington invited all 100 senators to a meeting in a secure room on the Hill, along with top members of President Joe Biden's national security apparatus, to discuss the bill. Roughly 60 senators, split equally among party lines, attended, along with Raimondo, Deputy Defense Secretary Kathleen Hicks, and National Intelligence Director Avril Haines. They met for nearly 2 hours. The group of senators asked around 30 to 40 questions on the various national security implications of relying on chips made in China or Taiwan, according to a senior Commerce Department official, particularly for defense applications. Other questions focus on the time, maybe there's some like weird backdoor within the actual chips themselves. If the chips are made in Taiwan or China, that, you're in your iPhone, it doesn't matter if you have TikTok. Maybe that's what they're thinking in the future here, because the quantum computing's on our doorstep, and like fusion energies on our doorstep. So maybe we need to start like hampering down on where these chips are made, which does make sense a little bit, but I don't like it being used to like enforce like free speech regulations in the long run, which seems to be what's going to happen. But sorry, inner ramblings of Andy, we're going to continue on with the article here. George shall be joining us here. 7 minutes. I wish I had a little countdown until George joined. Other questions focused on the timeline for building up U.S. semiconductor capacity and whether Congress would be too late if they passed the legislation after the August recess. One of the main points that struck lawmakers, according to Raimondo, came from Hicks. 8% of the chips purchased by the Department of Defense are tested and packaged in Asia. That briefing really moved members who were on the fence, Raimondo says. The Senate passed bill aims to address that, and it includes $52 billion in subsidies to domestic semiconductor manufacturers, $24 billion to create a tax credit for new semiconductor manufacturing facilities, and more than $170 billion over 5 years to boost U.S. scientific research. The measures were designed to make the U.S. more competitive on the global scale, particularly as China becomes a world leader in semiconductor production, an industry that many in Washington view as a key economic and national security. During the briefing, Haines walked the group through various scenarios that could arise if the U.S. remained reliant on foreign chips, using geopolitical threats like Taiwan being at risk of annexation by China as an example of how losing access to chips could further harm global supply chain disruptions. Now, this is the various scenarios, like Event 201. Before the pandemic broke out, everyone knows that John Hopkins, Bill Gates, Event 201 sponsored pandemic breakdown before the actual pandemic broke out. This is like the same thing that happened here. She had various scenarios that she showcased to these senators in this closed backdoor meeting that influenced them all to vote for the bill. And I'm going to get into that in a moment, right before George shows up. So several Republican senators told reporters after the briefing that they were spooked by the national security risk of not acting. If access to jets were cut off or restricted, we would be up a creek without a paddle. So maybe they're cutting off like military operations through these chips. Republicans, and maybe they just flip of a switch. If access to jet, oh, sorry, I just read that. John Cornyn of Texas, a key driver in the effort to pass the legislation, said on the Senate floor on July 6, we couldn't produce a stockpile of Javelin missiles to supply Ukraine or produce the radars and communication devices that keep our troops and our allies connected. Excuse me. And GOP leader McConnell agreed to come back to negotiating table after he had ordered his party in early July to stop cooperating with the CHIPS discussions as long as Democrats pursued a climate policy folk reconciliation bill. Less than a week after the national security meeting on CHIPS, Democratic West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin said he wouldn't reach a deal with his party on reconciliation, so McConnell signaled he was open to voting yes on the CHIPS bill. This is about national security, McConnell said on July 26. I wish it were inexpensive, but it is not. Manchin and Schumer reached a surprise deal on July 27th. And apparently Mike Pompeo, I'm going to dig into the actual simulation exercise in a moment here, but apparently Mike Pompeo is the guy on they mentioned earlier in the article that there's like some Trump backers on the Republican side that led the charge on getting this bill passed, and that was Mike Pompeo himself. He was holding some backdoor meetings with them trying to get the CHIPS Act passed. And reminder, the CHIPS Act is leading to this Restrict Act, which is banning TikTok and maybe, which this is where I think they're going. I think George Webb is thinking the same thing. They're going to use this Restrict Act to start banning citizen journalists on the internet. That's where I think it's going. And hopefully George Webb can answer that question when he jumps on the show here in a couple moments. So I got another article here to get into before he pops in here. And it's called When the Chips Are Down. Now, you may have noticed I changed the title of the show, actually, from BioWeapons 9/11, which is something we are going to be digging into with when G-Dub shows up. But it was also like he wrote Anthrax 9/11 and Corona 9/11, which are incorporated in his book World War DARPA. And I was going to break that stuff down, but I found all this stuff out. So I figured this would be a perfect lead into George coming on the show because as you know, George got banned during the pandemic, and we don't want to see that again here with this Restrict Act. They always say it's China and Russia at first, and they come. Then they come for us, the truth tellers, the conspiracy theorists. That's what they start. They label as conspiracy theorists, and they ban us. So the chips are down is the actual name of this simulation exercise that was put on by the military, and this was the simulation exercises they used to collect the metadata for that backdoor Senate meeting to convince the senators to pass the CHIPS Act, which eventually led to the Restrict Act and the limiting of free speech. Now, actually, I do have the big guy himself, our favorite journalist, as George Webb just joined the chat. So let's say hi to George. George, how you doing? It's been a while.
Hey, Andy. It's so great seeing you again. I know you've been all over the West. I think you've been in Arizona and New Mexico. And I've been following you remotely from all your great interviews that you've been having along the way. It's really been fun watching you.
Well, I haven't been doing as much. I I took a little bit more of a vacation approach to my travels than what you do. I saw you going to South Africa. You're still digging into the research and doing all that, and I was like, I like history and stuff, so I partook in like the digging into like the pueblos and going to those old historical sites and the Grand Canyon and all those geological sites. But I also met with Dason, and I'm going to ask you a couple questions about some of the research Dason's been working on, and hopefully you have some stuff to help us lead in his investigations as well, and it's linked to like Robert Oppenheimer and Promise Software and the Los Alamos lab. So I know you know all about that type of stuff, and your insights will be appreciated. But I don't, have you caught the beginning of the show here? I wasn't sure if you did. I was digging into Mark Warner a little bit. I was in your Twitter Spaces earlier, and he's the one leading this TikTok Restrict Act ban against China, and I think eventually it's going to be a ban on U.S. citizen journalists. What are your thoughts on this Mark Warner and this Restrict Act, George Webb?
Well, I think Deb said it best. You know, it shouldn't take a U.S. senator and an act of Congress and a major news network to ban one guy. And why did they want to ban me? Sorry about that. Why did they want to ban me? Because I was saying they were taking. I'm sorry, we got a tree frog behind me, Andy. We're here in Florida. The tree frog wants to get in on this action. But they wanted
I heard DARPA was making little tree frog CIA
robot
spies, so you better be wary out there, George Webb.
He was on the other side last night, so I thought this side would be okay to do. We have rain here in Florida, and a lot of rain, and I thought, well, I'll do this under the Sapulpa, whatever the heck they call this thing here. But I did see your picture with Dason, and I just imagined, Deborah, thank you for all your great work. I just imagined all the women all over the world kind of clutching their hearts, when they saw how he cut his hair. There's female admirers all over the world. But now he's shockingly
first they were pulling out their checkbook so they could get a nice little like hairpiece made for him. But Dason had some beautiful locks.
Yeah, Dason does, and he's only he could pull that off, where he cuts all of his hair off, and he's still a gorgeous model. But his hair, I mean, really was one for the ages. I mean, Samson, and maybe there's like two other people in history that have had that beautiful of hair, mm-hmm. that are male. I think Pitt tried to go there, but couldn't quite get there. And then I think
it needed to spend 7 years in New Mexico, not Tibet.
Yeah, 7 years in New Mexico. Yeah. But then I think Colin Farrell, when he played Alexander the Great, had some of the Dason going on, mm-hmm. When he was riding the big horse and doing the charges, the Alexander the Great charges. But Dason certainly, as far as the dark locks go, no one even close. Well,
he did. I did appreciate it, because I was on a long trip back from the Grand Canyon, and I stopped late at night, and he was like, "Hey, I got work at 6 a.m., but I'll come hang out for a couple hours." And we were both just like super tired, sitting there just talking about like Robert Oppenheimer and some like Russian KGB labs that were also linked to like Robert Maxwell and Promise Software around the corner. And it was just like, I think I'm close enough where if we put some work into this, we can make some nice we could do some research, make some nice little videos about the about the subject, because Epstein's ranch wasn't too far away, and if Robert Maxwell in his Promise software had links to like nuclear chemistry labs like a couple hours away, that heightens my spidey senses a little bit.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the Promise software was sort of a recruiting tool for all the national laboratories for the kind of the guards that got put in there. We've seen G4S, we've seen the various other G4S spinoffs that have come in and out of our national labs. But isn't it interesting that we have foreign operatives at the guards for our major national laboratories? And Sandia is the weaponized lab, and of course Lawrence Livermore is more of an experimental lab, and Los Alamos more of an experimental lab. So, but yeah, Dason is one of those guys who, he's like wise, way beyond his years. I always tell the story when we were in San Diego, and it always embarrasses him. But there was the Lady Scripps, who was underwriting our week of investigation there. We're on the Pacific Ocean, right next to the Western White House, where Nixon wanted to put the Western White House until he decided to do the Southern White House here in Florida with B.B. Rebozo and Key Biscayne. But so it couldn't have been more beautiful. And there was a little area where a little park where people were getting married. And we watched these people kind of come and go over the 10 days we had this beautiful beach house. And there was this beautiful young lady, shockingly gorgeous lady, a young Asian woman who was playing, she was setting up her organ to play these different weddings. She was playing the weddings outside at the stand-up organ and so forth. And Dason, if you remember, was sort of our biomancer. He was channeling truth. He was kind of doing his interpretive, not dance, but interpretive.
Slow Tai Chi.
Yeah, slow Tai Chi.
Yep.
And this shockingly beautiful woman from across the way couldn't help but notice Dason. And Dason wasn't paying attention to this at all. And
there's a little Cupid that was sitting in the tree and just pulled that arrow back and just sprayed this lady with a Cupid bioweapon.
Yeah. You know where I was going. She parked her car. The first day it was at a distance, but then the second day, the car was parked incredibly close to our house, even though there was plenty of spaces across the way. So she made sure that when she was, breaking down from her weddings that she was having, that she was right there looking at the deck, looking at Dason. And one night she said, well, it'd be nice to introduce myself. And I thought, of course, Andy, it was you that she was making the move on, the shockingly handsome man that you are.
She could push me out of the way. I saw like love eyes, and I was like, me? And then she like kept approaching me, and my like heart started racing, and then she just like pushed me out of the way.
And then Dason was sort of like a marked man, yes. And not that you didn't have a lot of attention. We're sitting on this, beach where all these women are coming and going, and they see your beautiful, blonde locks and your gorgeous face and so forth. So there
was that billionaire sitting there on his beachfront property.
A lot of the women thought you were a billionaire. Women came over to me and asked me, do you happen to know who that is? And I said, well, he owns the place and he really doesn't want to say who he is. But yeah, so they wanted your number and so forth. But this one was a beautiful moment, really, that consummated there in front of us, and not right in front of us. I mean, they did, find a way to sneak away, but Dason came back the next morning and he had a smile on his face.
Yeah.
I would have to be honest to report.
It was a little odd. Like usually when we have these big group charrettes, we all like go to these spots and we all walk around everywhere and do our research. But Dason, he was actually just skipping the whole time. It was just like skip, skip, and it's like Dason, will you stop skipping? You're ruining our shots. And he's like, I can't help it, guys. Go on.
He did have a little skip in his step, and it did seem a little odd. He seemed like it was like he was in fourth grade, but when you first learn how to skip, that kind of thing. But
James Jameson. That's
yes.
that was James Jameson. I forgot.
Even though he was having the time of his life with romance, he was still able to do this incredible research. And you go back to Bob Maxwell, and you go back to all the Mossad infiltration into our national laboratories, and with the Promise software and so forth. And absolutely, James Jameson was the key guy who had General Atomics, and that was a spinoff of General Dynamics. And General Dynamics, of course, was I.B. Hale, the people who stack up three bodies of close relatives of the people in the Kennedy motorcade before Kennedy's shot, with the Hales. And so it was, and then of course Hale goes on to start Convair, which is the missile company, and the F-111 fighter. What you got here? This is good.
Oh, this is one of our millionaire troll, billionaire James Jameson says this is Virginia Benassi. She was the 2016 Ebola response team that resulted in DTRE outfitting Philippines with BSL labs with Blackwater. We're still kind of.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean,
I won't put the picture of her up. We're still kind of figuring out if that's her or not exactly. It's
3 years later.
There.
Yeah, 3 years later, we don't know. But yeah, that was fun. I think all these charrettes, Andy, we don't realize how important they were, because they were 10 to 12 people coming together, meeting for the first time. Some of us, Chris the IP Hunter, Kathy met Decode the first time there. ECAT met Decode, I think, for the first time there. So we were meeting a lot of folks. I had met ECAT before that, but this was the first time a lot of people had met. And, as far as any kind of research, there's a certain amount of getting up to speed. Oh my gosh. Here I go. Yeah.
Here's I don't know what this is. This is back when.
He's saying I was the key guy negotiating the Iran nuclear deal. Do you think this might have something to do with Iran-Contra? Do you think that when Mike Flynn and the I can't remember the gentleman, it wasn't Admiral, they met in the lobby of the Trump Hotel, and I can't remember the guy's name from the State Department right now, but it was sort of like Michael Flynn's godfather mentor, a key operative in Iran-Contra. Now, I'm not saying Mike Flynn is a bad guy. I'm just saying he got in with the wrong crowd. I think that's Admiral. I'll think of that guy's name. Somebody will know it in a minute. But they met in the lobby of the Trump Hotel, and he was one of the key.
Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to turn it off. Go ahead.
Well, that was, I think, Admiral Poindexter, who was a key part of the Trump, when they were interviewing all the people who could be a part of his war cabinet. And then he had been a part of this company called IC3 that had negotiated all this, all these weapons that had been decommissioned in Soviet Union, 20,000 different warheads, and it hadn't got back to Piketon, Ohio. So we were trying to figure out where it ended up. Well, it ended up in 30 different nuclear reactors in the Middle East, and also Iran got half of it. Mm-hmm. This is some great footage shot by you, Andy, in the Port of Long Beach. What I love about your Port of Long Beach shot here was that later the Port of Long Beach did get backed up, if you remember, during COVID. Mm-hmm. And it was assigned, this is us going up to Salk Institute. Remember, Michael J. Bennett was
Carter Page's house.
Yep, Carter Page was an operative there. You remember Michael J. Bennett was in the van with us. Michael J. Bennett has 3 patents with Robert Malone.
Here's your Salk Institute shot. Yeah, this is we went to the Salk Institute, which, yeah, like you're saying, Robert Malone has patents with the Salk Institute for the mRNA vaccine. We didn't. Was Robert Malone on the scene at this time? I don't think he was.
No, he wasn't. But we're in the van with Michael J. Bennett.
Hmm.
Michael J. Bennett has 3 patents with Robert Malone, and Michael
Wait,
J.
what?
Yes, you remember Michael
I
Bennett?
know Michael J. Bennett. He has
Yes.
the guy who I'm not saying what car he drove, but he was driving a car that wasn't out yet. But that guy
In
was
the van with us, in that van that you just
wow.
do a search on Michael J. Bennett and Robert Malone, a Google search, and you'll see that there are several different. And the thing is, if you wanted to tag and trace, and you wanted a surefire way of tagging a terrorist that you're trying to trace, you would go with this FC pathway. And this FC pathway is your surefire method of marking the terrorist, right? That's what their patents are about. If you do this Google search, that guy came to our thing. We were there for 3 days with him.
I like that guy. I thought he seemed, I guess he seemed to be like I'm not sure. He seemed to be like not an anti-vaxxer, but like against the technology being used. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, he was looking for his theory was there's a backbone that came from China, and they put a spike on it that was created from a lab, and this is the whole reason that we think it's zoonotic, and it's not zoonotic. It's a chimera. It's an engineered spike put on a backbone, and he was looking into all this stuff. Well, we find out later that Dr. Andrew Huff, also ran into Michael J. Bennett and said he was a CIA agent, and said he was a part of the Salk's program for tagging and tracing terrorists.
Wow.
So, yeah, you see these patents with Michael J. Bennett and Robert Malone?
So, yeah, just read a couple of these patents off. Considerations for the design of improved cationic amplifier-based transfection reagents in 2008. Michael J. Bennett and Robert Malone both listed. Salivary gland genetic vaccination, a scalable technology promoting distal mucosal immunity and heightened systemic immune responses. Chemical enhancers of non-viral salivary gland gene transfer. What does that mean exactly? Chemical.
They were big into, with the salivary glands and the mucosal nasal stuff, they were big into nasal vaccines and also inhalable or drinkable vaccines.
Okay. So when you're seeing
this is something
I can't believe this guy was sitting right next to us. Robert Malone for sure wasn't on the scene at the time then. If
no,
we would have been asking a little more questions about their connection and their relationship.
Lady Scripps had set up several meetings with several admirals.
Mm-hmm.
Lady Scripps's son had tragically died. He was a naval aviator. He had died of H5N1, or maybe it was an H1N1, or maybe it was H3N2, but it was one of the very pathogenic influenzas, and he had been on this aircraft carrier. I believe it was the Dwight Eisenhower, but it could have been the JFK, but it was one of those that had gone through the Suez Canal, and they had moved it from that theater, the Fifth Fleet, and they had moved that carrier back to San Diego, and then he had died really super suddenly.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was the gal, if you remember, I don't want to say her name, but that was the gal who paid for our time there.
Yes. Okay, so It's gonna. I think he's in this interview at the end. If I'm. Oh, there's Gary.
And Michael is a Hollywood big director. He's done a lot of videos and a lot of documentaries.
I swear he was in one of these. You give me a second, George. I can find a Michael Bennett video from the charrette.
Well, we really had an amazing. I mean, here Gary gives us all this information. It was a beautiful location film. You got to see that right here.
Yeah, the sunsets were our mist.
Well, and Michael, the director there, had transitioned from doing a lot of gang stuff. We had been in Compton, and he had done the Bloods and Crips movie, and he had done a movie about one of the guys that got murdered. It was gosh, I'm gonna forget all my rappers that got murdered.
Was it? It wasn't Biggie or Two. It was Biggie and
It was
Tupac, right?
Tupac. That's right. He did a thing on Tupac. He took me to the Murder Burger, where he got murdered and everything, and he had done kind of a 25-year follow-up where all these guys who were a part of the Crips and Bloods were now, they called them, they gave them some other name. It wasn't Bloods anymore. It was a different name. But anyway, they were going back to the kids now and saying, don't do what we did. Don't kill everybody like we did. So it was a good follow-up film. I don't know if Michael ever finished that film. But I assume he did.
We also had the Black Dahlia come and do a private presentation about his, or the Black Dahlia's son do a presentation about his father, correct?
Yeah, George Hodel had been a China hand, basically flown over to Wuhan, strangely enough, on the trade concessions on the Yangtze River, and he had been a part of the northern city at that time was called Hankow, and was one of the 3 cities that formed Wuhan, and it was the Flying Tigers that were flying the drug routes, the opium routes. That was the bloodline and money source for Chiang Kai-shek. So, I mean, that was crazy because he established the original Red Cross base there and whatnot, and this is supposedly his son who was giving us this lecture. And he, of course, had said his father had murdered this woman who had been used as a sexual lure for Howard Hughes, named the Black Dahlia. And Robert Mayhew had been using her to kind of control the thoughts and actions of Howard Hughes, and Howard Hughes was being defrauded of all of his inventions, strangely connected with the General Dynamics in Dallas, because Howard Hughes had the plane that they sabotaged that was going to be the high altitude surveillance fighter interceptor type plane that crashed and almost killed Howard Hughes, that then I.B. Hale sold to the U.S. government with the F-111. So all this stuff is kind of connected that we're doing. It was
well, Howard Hughes is actually connected to the Seattle flu study. They were one of the funders as well, if I remember correct. That was like one on my very first solo show I ever did with a shaky voice by myself.
Well, you mentioned the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and one of the ways that Bob Mayhew did control Howard Hughes was through fear of germs, through fear of when he got venereal disease and so forth. Howard Hughes threw out all of his very expensive suits and so forth, and Howard Hughes did not understand the mucosal membranes and mucosal fluids were necessary to transmit. So he was very much putty in Mayhew's hands. And then after Howard Hughes died, or right before Howard Hughes died, they changed his will in such a way that a lot of the money went to the Howard Hughes Medical Institute for research into virology. And the key beneficiaries of that money was the Salk Institute.
Mhm.
And here we go.
No, sorry, I didn't know. I was seeing if this was the Michael Bennett one. Go on with the. No, it's not.
Well, that's a good one to show because that was our old trigger reel or old where Andy, you're I think Eddie Adds is in that reel, and some Wes and some other citizen journalists are in that opening reel for the old Neighborhood News. But this Neighborhood News, of course, was the brainchild of you and Aaron Adler to tear a hole in the sky in journalism in the Midwest in a small town called Temperance, Michigan. And until that, yeah, there you go. There's
I guess I'll show you the intro.
There's Aaron.
Here's the intro. Aaron wants to talk to you, by the way. He has an offer he'd like to make or something like that. So I don't know if he reached out to you, but he told me to let you know.
Great.
I believe you are in. Can you hear it? I don't know why the sound's.
No, I can't hear this, but I remember making this video.
Is this the 5x5? We had 5.
This is right before we had a big book sign.
You have a potential there for an Imran Awan type of character to do his dirty business. And then you also have the Navy corpsman who provides all the drugs. Now remember, Imran Awan and his crew did have a Defense Logistics Agency number. And they did have a trading number, a cage code, as it were. So we know that he traded. I had a personal whistleblower come out to me at Mount Vernon and tell me that they also provided drugs meaning pharmaceuticals for the sailors. So was this H1N1? We're investigating this H1N1 outbreak, not the one that happened this year with coronavirus, but there was also an outbreak on the same exact aircraft carrier in 2009. And there was H1N1 deaths from that. Most people don't know this. We've talked about the H1N1 hoax in Belgium. We've talked about NATO. Turns out that the Theodore Roosevelt was in the Middle East and Cape Town, South Africa, right before this outbreak, and it still seems to be classified. So we're going to follow up on that story this week.
And I don't know if you've seen in the news, George, this new H5N1 that's been going around the world. They figured out that it can infect ferrets as well. And you've done a lot of research into you actually went to the Rotterdam lab and did some videos and asked some people some questions. So you've done a lot of research and gain of function, because that's where all that kind of stems from. Am I correct?
Yeah, it's funny that ferrets come out, because I think I wrote Spray It in Dutch. I think I wrote 3 years ago now with the ferrets. But this H1N1, now I remember it was a Theodore Roosevelt. I got both carriers wrong. I've interviewed so many different people over the time. Sometimes here we go.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, George. I'm just trying to see if I can find Michael Bennett, because that would be. I think this is.
Well, a lot of these old videos, you'd be surprised how laden they are with research, because I think, most of the people around the internet, they saw you, me, Aaron, Addie, Tom, Wes, Chris Hunter. They were able to see a whole team of people working together that really wanted to get the answers. And I think people enjoyed that. They enjoyed us working together and seeing this team effort. It was sort of like the Action News team that people really enjoyed seeing. And so a lot of people got behind this. And my goodness.
This was like citizen journalism, like up close and like you're watching the process, like you're getting a view, a peek into like what goes on into the back door meetings. Like if New York Times was breaking a story, they'd have their guys doing their research and making calls, and someone runs in and they're like, guys, look what I found out, and then they all go like nuts and stuff, and oh, we found this new link. And like really what was great, you're right, what was great about these, it was just live and in person, and that's awesome, because there was no lying, there's no fabricating the story, because every day we're just making the show and doing the broadcast, and we're just updating you as the news comes out and the research comes out, and we'll let that dictate our narrative. We're not going to come with a preset narrative. We're going to let the research figure out where the story goes to.
Yeah, very much so. As a newsroom environment, we basically brought you into the newsroom as the story developed. You found out about it real time. Michael Carlin is the filmmaker, and so he was an added bonus because he had a lot of documentary experience. And then, of course, we had, just Rick came down from Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
We had people from all over the country that came there, and we just interviewed the heck out of people. This was all during the middle of COVID, so people were trying to shut us down. We got the health department 3 different times tried to shut us down.
Oh, I forgot about that. They did.
Yeah.
They're like, people are on their own patio not wearing masks, and they were like shutting us down. So like we had to go outside and like stand there with masks sometimes, because it's California. It was they did everything they can. They pulled the James Jameson strings. It was like they saw the research happening. They saw us going to Salk Institute. They saw us going to all these different laboratories that we now know are like heavily involved in the process, and they didn't like us sniffing around at all.
Yeah, and Bob Malone, of course, gets his start there, and then a lot of the people, Indira Verma, who develops what I call the HIV cassette, which is HIV as, a large genome. But if you can keep knocking out genes, so you only get the essential genes for replication and reverse transcriptase to write the genetic information into your target cell. And that's only 10% of the original genome. And that's the cassette, the HIV cassette. And that's what Bob Malone got from Indira Verma. And so we're interviewing all these people. We're in and around. We had a John Gotti enforcer come and visit. We just had everything at this charrette that you could really hope for. And this tragic case of this kid who looked like Brad Pitt, who was a Navy aviator, and he had died so suddenly of this H1N1, I guess it was now.
Aaron was saying that Bennett was really focused on the missing sequences in the WIV database that went offline.
Yeah. Yes, he was. He was focused on the September 12th sequences. This is why I think Bob Malone wasn't in on what happened in Wuhan. I do think Bob Malone was downstream of this, and he knew that there was 20,000 sequences, and that they had all gotten pulled off on the September the 12th. And we talked about this a lot. Here's some of the great covers that Andy Dabala did for Bavari 911. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, this is this is your book, World War DARPA, actually. As you can see here is the skyline of New York, and I changed the Twin Towers to needles, and one of them says Anthrax and one of them says Corona.
That's the cover of Bavari 911. That's not the cover.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought that was World War DARPA.
You have an overlaid Cena Bavari's picture on that, but I remember that very clearly.
Oh yeah, you are right. I did.
It was.
Oh yeah, World War Darfur is a different cover. Maybe this is just the first insert, I guess.
That was the overlay that you did, but I
Okay.
mean, you did all the covers there. If I remember, I took all the booklets and basically we created 3 or 4 booklets per book, about 350 to 400 pages, and you know, Aaron and you and Tyrone and oh gosh, John Wilkins and everybody just would stay up until their eyes were razor blades and printing.
Then we had 4 to 8 hours worth of shows the next day that we were doing. It was
jogging papers and then binding the glue and burning the glue and sending the books in the morning. And Aaron would run over to the Saturday morning, run over to the post office and get the things out before 12. So it really was a magical time of in-house kind of cottage industry publishing. And we put out a lot of information, and a lot of that research, you know, is now, you know, paper lasts. You know, they can go and whack this stuff electronically, but a lot of this paper still exists.
Yeah, that I was just gonna kind of lead this into the Restrict Act and what they're trying to implement. They're using the Restrict Act to ban TikTok currently, and I think that's going to lead to citizen journalists as well. And you're the perfect person to be digging into this because you're affected by it. The reason this book is on the screen, and you talked about me making covers and our neighborhood news studio team meeting up and having all these charrettes. The reason you had to do that is because you were just like getting banned on everything. You weren't allowed to post anything on YouTube or even have accounts anymore. They took your Patreon away. You couldn't release your books on Amazon anymore. So it resulted in us all like getting behind you and creating this grassroots effort to figure out the truth and make sure like the truth is out there and people can access it, because the policies like this Restrict Act are currently being implemented, which lead to like the Section 230 and stuff, and the ban of free speech. And that's what we're trying to avoid here. And with you and with us, I guess the neighborhood news story kind of started with the lady on the left here, Virginia Benassi, and that's why it all got taken away.
Yeah, I mean, it's very rare in life that you get named by a U.S. senator, and they say that there shouldn't need to be a U.S. major U.S. senator and a network that to get somebody banned from YouTube. And I was already banned, and for 2 years. They just wanted to make sure I couldn't be on a show like yours right now, like here.
Mm-hmm.
And his famous comment was, "It shouldn't take an act of Congress." Well, now Mark Warner is doing that act of Congress. He is doing Senate Bill 686, and he is trying to restrict. I'm just one of many, obviously, a canary in the coal mine, but he was serious. He wants to take away everybody's right to free speech. He's not happy with all the right. I've been following him ever since he put Oleg Deripaska on Trump's ass.
Mm-hmm.
As a spy, a wrangler for all these different spies that were infiltrated into Trump's campaign. And you know, Mark Warner is a DNC fixture for Adam Schiff. He'll do anything. He's a henchman for Adam Schiff.
Well, sorry, I lost my screen here. Yeah. Are you there, George?
Yeah, you can always tell these people that are servitors, they always have a hangdog expression because. Can you still hear me, Andy?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I'm not sure what's going on now. Something got interrupted.
Okay, but you can just see he's living a miserable life. Anytime you have to report to Adam Schiff, it's sort of like having to eat dog poo every morning, but you get to eat. It's like, but here he is, doing what he needs to do, putting in the restrictions he needs to put in, with the Restrict Act, Senate Bill 686.
Well, this, I guess why I am I did my little preamble on the show about this gentleman. Sorry, I lost my like StreamYard stream and I can't see at all, and it's kind of messing me up here. I don't know what's going on.
You're as beautiful as ever, Andy. I can see you.
All right, I don't know what's on the screen right now, but what led to this Restrict Act? First, it all started out with the CHIPS Act, and they had to. That's kind of what I led the show off with, some of this research. This CHIP Act, bringing semiconductor chip manufacturing in the United States. They couldn't agree to do it, or pass this bill amongst our politicians. So they're like, they put on this SimEx, what you've been digging into, this military simulation exercises, proving the point of making it a national security exercise to have these semiconductor chips be brought over to the United States, because with the advancements of quantum computing and stuff, they really thought like, we need to get this stuff in house and stop relying on Taiwan and China to bring our chips in house. And then after, and this Mark Warner was like the head proponent about that. He was one of the leading senators in bringing the CHIPS Act to be passed by the politicians, bipartisanly, if that's even a word at all. I'm not sure. But and then next thing you know, he's coming out leading the charge on this Restrict Act, and they're using China and Russia and like some of these BRICS countries as an excuse to limit the information via TikTok being brought to the American public. And next thing you know, like you're saying, it's going to be used on citizen journalists. And it's odd to me that they just use this like chip manufacturing and this CHIPS Act like a simulation exercises to ultimately limit free speech here in the United States.
Yeah, this is all bullshit. I hate to say it, but the whole thing with TikTok was Josh Hawley, from the senator from Iowa, had done a bill earlier saying that no U.S. devices run by U.S. government personnel should be able to run TikTok, because while you're streaming, the Chinese could be backdooring a whole bunch of information from national laboratories and so forth. I get that. That makes a lot of sense. The chips in question for that act were the Huawei chips that had the back door. So all that makes sense. But what he's trying to do, and this is a typical DNC move, is take something that's a legitimate security risk, and then try to then judo it on the people of the United States to take away their freedoms, which is if you read the language of the bill, there's no mention of TikTok actually in the bill. It's he's spun all this, DNC organ, the Wurlitzer of lies, to tell everybody that it's all about TikTok. That's a complete fabrication. This is all about knocking down VPNs, knocking down any kind of encrypted communication, and knocking down any kind of communications of anybody that they think is a risk. And there's no judicial oversight, and there's no congressional oversight. This is just a Gestapo that, freestanding Gestapo that Mark Warner runs.
And as we all know, you've already been affected by this limiting of free speech amongst Americans and American journalists. And it's unfortunate to see this TikTok China ban being used as a backdoor to continue their work in limiting our free speech, because we know the work that you've been doing. If you've been buying your books like the ones I've been putting on the screen, you've been on point this whole time, and you've been like a year, 2 years, like you've been ahead of schedule, and everyone seems to be playing catch up with you. And like we just we just hope that like it all seems to start with citizen journalism. It, like, especially nowadays, it seems like the mainstream media, the news companies, are kind of looking on Twitter and picking and choosing like what stories are out there, and then putting them on their own broadcasts in their own words. And if they start limiting the little guy, it's just gonna get even worse. Because, I mean, thank God for Rumble at this point, but YouTube and uh, Twitter only goes so far. But I don't want to take too much of your time, George. Here, I currently can't even like see you or see a screen. I don't know what's going on.
Well, you got
I'm
Mark
surprised
Warner.
I can talk to you at the moment.
No, that's good, Andy. I just want to say thank you to you and your significant other there in Lubbock, and thanks to Aaron Adler for having the great vision, and Tyrone and John and all the people that went there, and all the people that went there to Michigan to volunteer their time and make really history. And we scared the bejesus out of all of them, because journalism school for real in the Midwest, on the state border between two swing states, that scared the uh, holy fright out of both of them, or out of the DNC. And so I just say keep up the great work, Andy. It's great following you, and I can't wait to see you next week, and I can't wait to see you on Friday. See what you come up with, and Monday.
All right. I'll send you as much research as I can find, George Webb.
Awesome.
You know how we like to do. And I would like, can't figure it out. If you yourself would like to send George research, at Real George Webb 1 on Twitter. Just if you got some insightful stuff that you think might pique his interest a little bit, at Real George Webb 1 on Twitter. And after you send him some research, make sure you scroll to the top of the page and you hit that Buy Me a Coffee button. You hit that PayPal button. I'm sorry it's not on the screen now, and support George Webb. He went to South Africa. He's been all around the world. He's been all around the United States, digging into the origins of coronavirus. And like I've been saying throughout the show, he's been personally affected by the ban of free speech. He wasn't allowed to have a Patreon account. His YouTube account got banned, which he had a bunch of followers on, and you can make money on YouTube. He wasn't allowed to write books on Amazon. So he needs the support. And go to his Twitter page at Real George Webb 1 and give it to him. Thank you, George, for coming on once again on this.
Thanks, Andy.
On this beautiful Wednesday. I hope to see you next week. And forgive me, audience, for the sound doubling up here as I log back into a StreamYard and cancel the show.
Thanks, Andy. Bye-bye.
Night, George. All right, ladies and gentlemen.